Welcome to the Tackling Tech podcast, powered by Dyknow. Join us as we tackle all things ed tech with insightful interviews, actionable tips, and strategies that you can implement in your school or district to make technology integration more effective. Whether you're a teacher, a tech coach, or a technology administrator, we're giving you an advantage in your role by sharing stories from people who are passionate about working with their peers and enhancing the learning experience with technology. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Now let's tackle some tech.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tackling Tech, a podcast that shares stories about how you can build better collaboration in K-12 schools, and a show that is dedicated to putting a voice to remote learning. I am Brett McGrath, Vice President of Marketing at Dyknow, and excited to be back with a normal episode again. If you listened last week, it was a little atypical. It was me flying solo. We had some last-minute changes with some schedules of some of our guests, and by the time we had to record and put it out, I had to adapt and create an episode just to make sure we kept the Tackling Tech consecutive streak alive. It's quite amazing. I was thinking back to it. I think we launched the first episode right before everybody picked up from their schools, left, and started teaching remotely. So we've been going strong ever since, and I was not going to let that streak die because of some things that were outside of anyone's control. So I hope you enjoyed last week. I took a step back when I realized I was going to fly solo and thought to myself, okay, I have learned a ton, and I know I'm not an educator. I'm a marketer that hosts this show and facilitates conversations, but I had the opportunity to share some of the things that I've learned along the way from people like you that have been on this show. So I had a lot of fun doing it. Hopefully you can relate with that top 5 list. If you didn't listen, you can go check that out. Start a conversation. We'd love to hear from you. But yeah, that was different, but a lot of fun. But I'm really excited to be back on track, and I know it is a really, really busy time for you, whatever role you are within your school or district. Back to school time is here, and we have been hearing from you. And I know it is tough sometimes as you're jumping in and trying to figure out what this school season's going to be like and school year's going to be like. And I think, you know, the key word that I found and what has impressed me the most about doing this show and talking with educators is adaptability. And man, the K-12 market is some of the most adaptable humans I've ever met in my life. From having to drop on a dime to pick up, start teaching remotely. If you're in a technology role, trying to make sure teachers had the access to the tools that they needed to operate remotely. District leaders, making sure that parents were communicated to appropriately and everyone was kept on track with all the changes going around. That's something that certainly impressed me throughout the last several months. And so I think adaptability is probably more important than ever. Everyone's going back to a different environment, teaching environment, whether it's going back to the physical classroom, a hybrid, or staying with remote or distance learning. I think I have full confidence that last spring was kind of like training camp, and now it's the real deal, and you all are playing the games, and that's what matters most. So I'm excited to talk with more educators during this period and learn about how you are adapting to better serve the needs of your students during this time period. I've got family that are educators, and I know they're going back, and they've been back this week. My father-in-law is a teacher, and my brother-in-law is a teacher. So I saw some pictures from both in high school. I saw some pictures this week from my brother-in-law. He is teaching in the cafeteria of the high school that I went to. He's teaching at his alma mater. Chairs are spread out. They're using every inch of that building. And it's a little different, but he's making it work. And I think everyone has the opportunity to make it work. And whether it's just with personalized learning, leveraging new technologies, I think there's an opportunity here to get better, and I'm excited to hear from all of you and share those stories on this show. With that being said, we've got an amazing lineup of guests that are in store for the next couple weeks. I'd love to hear from you. If you have people, or even if it's yourself and you've got something to share that you think would benefit everyone else, reach out to me. You can email me at bmcgrath@dyknow.com, or you can reach out at Tackling Tech Pod, whatever you want to do. Reach out to us. We want to hear from you. Your engagement is really what motivates us to keep this show going, and we're really excited about that. So we're about to announce, or we will have announced, you might be the first to hear this by the time this goes out. Yeah, we're announcing this week the Progressive Learning Conference, which is going to be starting off, and it's going to be Progressive Learning Week. We're calling it Progressive Learning Week because we know everyone has different schedules, and we know that you all can't be there for live events, so that's how we're setting it up. So Progressive Learning Conference and Progressive Learning Week kicks off on September 28th. We'll have a keynote still pending, so that'll be announced soon. We'll have a keynote that will be at 12 Eastern, and it will be a keynote regarding progressive learning, specifically about blended learning in the classroom. I'm really, really excited about it. It's going to be really cool, and the presenter's going to be awesome, so you're going to want to check that out. And then each day, we are going to release a new recorded track with subject matter experts in all of the progressive learning styles that we've been talking about on this show. It's going to be awesome. Tiara on the marketing team spending a lot of time working with those guests, getting that in order, and more to come. So go check out we'll have information if it isn't already up by the time this drops for the Progressive Learning Conference. We'll have a landing page at dyknow.com. You can go check out and sign it up. If you get our emails, you'll certainly get an email about registration. But it's going to be a really good opportunity, and we wanted to make sure that it was something that, no matter what your schedule or time was on, you had access to the content, and the content will be exclusive to those that sign up. So make sure that if you have interest or you want to learn about who's going to be on it, just drop your email in with that. When you do that, we'll make sure we can give you access to the recording. So I will be sharing more information about the lineup agenda and all the talk tracks here in the coming weeks, but really excited to announce the Progressive Learning Conference on Progressive Learning Week. We've talked a lot about just all the various types of learning styles from subject matter experts on this show, and I think it's more important than ever to share more information and get deep in the weeds as you're all going back to school. So super excited about that. You can follow us at Dyknow on Twitter, all the social channels. You can follow us at Tackling Tech Pod as well. Definitely make sure you check out our YouTube channel. We are publishing content at a very, very rapid pace. We've got the Tech Coach Corner Show that is on YouTube, along with all of our other digital events and recordings of Tackling Tech as well. So you're going to want to make sure that you go to the YouTube page, go hit the subscribe button. We definitely appreciate that. If you're liking what you're listening to here on Tackling Tech, hit the 5-star button for us, please. That would be great. And drop us a review if you wouldn't be so kind. That stuff matters, and that stuff is something that we really appreciate from all of you, the great listeners. All right, let's jump in. So I am really excited about this conversation. I learned a ton, excited to share it with you. I interviewed Ari Flewelling, who is a ed tech guru. We found her on Twitter. She's been publishing some awesome content, and she's got a really, really great perspective of stakeholders, ed tech, stakeholders that should be involved in ed tech, progressive learning, professional development, you name it. She's got a lot of great insights. You're going to want to take out your notebook and take some notes for this one, because I know you're going to learn a ton. I learned a ton too. So without further ado, let's kick it to that conversation. All right, everyone, welcome back to Tackling Tech. I am really excited for this conversation. So I asked my team going into this school year to monitor all social media channels and definitely tap people on the shoulder who are talking about things that we talk about on this show. And that's what happened with today's guest. We are joined by Ari Flewelling. Ari is on Twitter at EdTechAri, and she's got a website that I thought was clever that says, cool on the internet, even cooler in real life. I know she's got a ton of experience in K-12 and does some consulting work. Before we jump in, and we're going to talk a lot about professional development, which I know is a topic that we get a lot of questions about on Tackling Tech. So I'm really excited. Ari, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, no problem. I'm curious, just before we get into it, would you mind providing just some background on your experience and the roles you've had in K-12?
Sure. So I started out in K-12 education as a high school English teacher and did that for a few years and absolutely loved it. But of course, I was very fortunate to grow up with a computer in my bedroom from about the age of 4. My dad would get the old computers and bring them home every time his work was upgrading to a new one. So I was very lucky to be able to have technology in my fingertips at such a young age. So naturally, when I was in the classroom, I was trying to, rig up every bit of technology I could gather from, Google and, TVs and what have you. So naturally, that led me to a position as a district educational technology coach, teaching others about how to use different things from both a points and clicks aspect, moving all the way to really how can we use that technology to innovate what we do in education and how our students are interacting with content.
That's awesome. And I think definite competitive advantage growing up with access to a computer and all the upgrades and latest, greatest. I guess, we've heard a lot on this show, teachers, while COVID was happening, when everyone left their classrooms and everything went digital, there was these two groups of teachers. You had kind of the tech comfortable, the teachers that were used to leveraging technology in the classroom, and then you had teachers that were more tech uncomfortable, or teachers that were used to maybe, traditional means of education where, technology wasn't the case. And everyone's kind of had to deal with leveraging technology when everyone went remote. What are your thoughts just now that students, children, educators, everyone's kind of in this back to school mode right now? What's your perspective on just the use of technology going into this back to school? Do you think that period that we just came from in the spring semester will help out some of these teachers that might not have been used to technology before?
I think so. It was definitely a rushed implementation to go into remote learning. And of course, students were held harmless and all these different things. So, whenever I talked with teachers, I was like, now is your opportunity to try everything that you're interested in, because since your students aren't being held accountable, if something gets screwed up, it's not throwing off your scope and sequence the way it would traditionally. So it's definitely been a time of great exploration and curiosity. And what I hope for the fall is that teachers and school districts and school leaders really kind of focus in on maybe, 2 to 5 tools with specific purposes. So that way teachers can get really well versed in some specific things. Of course, you're still going to have your innovators that are off and running and using everything. But I think for some of those teachers that were more uncomfortable with the tech in the spring, taking that approach will really allow them to make sure that they're using technology in a way that's comfortable for them, but also in a way that's consistent for their students. So I'm actually, as much as the fall is riddled with anxiety for a lot of different reasons and purposes that are all valid, I think there's actually a lot of room for excitement. And I'm also really excited too, because post-pandemic teaching, I feel like all teachers should be able to consider themselves techie at some way, shape, or form, which has been kind of a barrier for a long time. And, nobody is really going to be able to say like, oh, well, I don't use, an LMS, or I don't use Google, or I don't use Microsoft, because everybody's had to use it. So I'm excited for, the day when we can be back face to face with each other, because, we'll all have some semblance of a tech background now. And I think even more innovation will be able to come.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And I like what you said about just the focus. And I think there are so many tools and so many things teachers can be doing. And I think that's a really strong recommendation to get focused and figure out what is going to meet the needs of their students best. I know we're going to talk about professional development, but before I get off the kind of the reopening topic, I know all across the country, everyone's going back in a different way. Some people, some districts are back, others are in the process. It can be a continuation of remote learning. It can be kind of the hybrid model or back to the traditional classroom. Have you received any feedback so far on anyone who's back to school and how things are going?
Yeah, it's so interesting to see all the different models and all the different approaches that states and schools are taking. And I think the thing is it's, important to look at what your state's guidelines are, what your state for both education and health and public safety, and then looking at what your local health and public safety officers say as you're making these decisions, to be remote or be hybrid or whatnot. I think one of the consistent things that I'm hearing is just communication, consistent, clear communication, whether that be from district to families, district to schools, admin to teacher, teacher to teacher, teacher to student. The more that you can communicate and be transparent about what's happening in your district, the better people will be informed and be able to interact with you. And, whether that's give you feedback about what's going on or be able to ask questions about what's going on, that's having those open lines of communication are so crucial, because as much as possible, you want to try and have everybody on the same page. So there isn't any like, well, I didn't know that. Where'd you find that out? What was that? When was that posted? Because all that does is just add fuel to everyone's anxiety from, families all the way up to leadership. So I think that would be one big thing to think about.
Yeah, no, and that's really good. And I think just layering technology on top of that, technology allows for more communication channels than ever. So whether it is district to parents or student to teacher or you name it, there's probably some form of communication channel currently in place. And I think that was one of those things I heard a lot about from guests on this show of trying to figure that out. And it seemed to me the sentiment as, the school year ended, that was one of the areas just across districts that was improving. So hopefully as students go back, there's extra emphasis on that and that's in place, because I don't think anything happens without clear communication. All right, so let's jump into professional development. I think we jumped in on this podcast and talked a lot about remote learning when it was happening, and then jumped into the professional development side. We hosted a professional development summit and just got so much great feedback from experts on just how things have changed. Maybe we can start from the base level and from your perspective, because I know you think a lot about it, but just what does professional development mean to you?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think that when we're thinking about it on an individual teacher basis, it is teachers engaging in learning and activities that help them grow their pedagogical skills, their content knowledge skills, as well as their technological skills. And the best type of professional development is when you're able to bring all three of those concepts together.
I like that. And so I think a struggle that exists potentially is just those aren't always brought together, and sometimes decisions are made regarding professional development within a district, and some role types aren't involved that maybe should be involved in the front end, and then they get involved in the back end where they potentially could have offered some good feedback that would have made the process a little bit better. Do you have any thoughts on just how to create more synergy and alignment at the district level around professional development?
Oh, 100%. Really implementing anything at the district level will live and die based on who is on your planning committee. So when we think about technology specifically, I think it's important to start with what is your need from the curriculum and instruction lens? What are you trying to achieve for academic purposes with the technology? Don't start with the tech. The curriculum and instruction should always guide the tech. Then I would layer in your special education department to make sure that, okay, if this is our goal, what type of scaffolds need to be in place so that way our special education students or our language learner students are able to access rigorous grade level content in a way that is applicable with all, rules and regulations. Then if you're lucky enough to have an ed tech specialist or an ed tech department, you want to integrate them, because the ed tech folks are this bridge between curriculum and instruction and student learning and IT. They can talk to you about pedagogy, but then they could also turn around and talk to the IT person about, your Microsoft Teams organizational unit setup or your Google Classroom setup. So definitely bringing those people in, because they can speak both languages and they can make sure that when IT is trying to implement what curriculum instruction and special education wants, ed tech can help make sure that they're doing it in a way that meets the instructional goals. And when IT is thinking about doing an upgrade or changing your email system, ed tech can step in and say, well, wait, this is how this is going to have implications on curriculum and instruction. So really having them there is extremely important as well. And then, of course, I already mentioned them, but bringing them on board as well is of your IT department, because they're the people that are going to have to support. They're the ones that are going to get the phone calls asking, how do I click this, or where do I go to access this, or what's my password? So having them involved from the beginning is important too, because, even with things thinking about hybrid learning, you may want to have all teachers on campus live streaming to their students at home, but IT is probably the only person that knows whether or not your school's bandwidth can actually handle that. So if you don't have them included in the conversation, day one of live streaming, you may not be able to go live because you don't have what you need, and IT could have told you that. And then the last group of folks I would think would be important to integrate, especially depending on what the curricular and teaching and learning objective is if you have a department that focuses on data analysis, wanting to bring them in so that way you can get metrics to see, was the professional development useful? Did the professional development actually have an influence on teaching and learning? And if so, what was it?
I love that. That's really great. And hopefully everyone out there has got their notes page opened on their iPhone, or they've got a pen and paper out, because that's really good. So you talked a lot about just different role types within the professional development planning and implementation process. I think a lot of times silos might exist and these decisions get made. Kind of what I heard you recommend is, break down those silos, get everybody involved. If no matter the role, if someone is listening to this and feels like they are operating in a more siloed way, what are and you've probably been a part of this change, what's the first step that educators can take to start operating more unified when these decisions are made? What have you seen to be successful to get kind of a good PD process in place that involves everybody?
Oh, for sure. I think, when you have that team in place that's working on kind of that more high level, district level synergy and breaking down those silos, I think it's important to make sure that, people are asking questions. And when you're asked those questions, you are hearing them with an open ear, because that this isn't, someone trying to undermine you. This is someone that's trying to help build you up and build up what you're trying to do. I think it's also important too, if you are a teacher and you hear that things are being talked about at the district level, you could either, reach out yourself and ask a question, or you can ask if you have union representation, bring that up to your union and have the union ask on behalf of all of the educators in the district. In my last district, I was an ed tech TOSA, and I was actually a part of the union executive board, because I wanted to make sure that, we had representation both for teachers on special assignment and whatnot, but also too, to make sure that we have that ability to ask questions and we have that ability to provide feedback. Because I think the one thing that I left out of my first answer was, you need to make sure that as you're making these plans, you're engaging the relevant stakeholders. So if you're talking about implementing, a new curriculum that has a technology component, obviously you're going to talk to all of those people that I already mentioned, but you also want to make sure you're talking to the teachers that are actually going to teach it. And of course, not only that, but the special education educators that are going to support students with special needs that are interacting with that curriculum. And the one other thing I'd add is, I'd worked in districts where there was a lot of alignment, and I worked in districts where there wasn't. And I got great advice from a really good mentor once. And she said to me, she's like, if you know you should be in that meeting and you're not invited, show up. The worst thing they can do is tell you to leave. But at least they saw that you were there, you put in an interest, and that might make them rethink who they invite to the meeting next time.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think the teacher component is often left out, but definitely makes sense. Is your recommendation, are like the best teachers to be involved in that process, maybe those that have been super engaged and are the ones that are pushing kind of professional development the way it's been going on a regular basis? The more engaged teachers, I would imagine, might be the good ones to have a seat at the table when the planning is happening.
Honestly, you want to have a mix. You want to have some of those educators that are very gung-ho and are very interested, because they're going to, be able to provide you feedback probably from a seat of using the technology and being very hands-on with the technology. But you want to have someone that's on that committee that might be a bit more uncomfortable with technology, because that represents a group of your users, and you want to hear their concerns from the planning phase. I mean, you want to make sure that you're going to address their concerns before you do a rollout, because we always say to our students, you should ask the question, because 9 times out of 10, you're not the only one with that question. So same thing, if someone's bringing up a concern about technology implementation or, professional development for that technology implementation, if one person has that concern, I guarantee you more people do too. So you also want to have some of those, not as enthusiastic people at the table. Just make sure that even if they're not necessarily enthusiastic about technology, they're going to give you constructive criticism, not just bring down the process, because you don't want that to get in the way, but you do want to make sure that you're listening to their needs.
Absolutely. There's been tech coaches on this show that have said that in order to get some of the tech detractor teachers to the table, just bribe them with a free lunch or something like that. Sometimes that can get them involved. And once they're involved, then they start to speak up, and that voice is super important and super powerful. So I do like that.
100%. I would be using technology and I would talk about it with my peers, and they'd be like, oh, okay, good, cool, good job. But then if one of, my peers that, didn't talk about technology all the time, talked about the exact same thing, more people would be interested. So you want to capitalize on that when you're marketing your technology and you're marketing your PD to the teachers in your district. And I think it's also important too is, if this technology that you're implementing is going to be student facing, get a group of student stakeholders or get a group of parent stakeholders. I know one thing that was a struggle for a district I worked with when they switched from PowerSchool Learning to only using Google Classroom is PowerSchool Learning had a parent portal. Google Classroom only has Guardian summaries. That didn't get brought up until after the switch was made, because parents weren't engaged as a part of the process.
Yeah, that's a big change, and that's a good way to tie a bow in that. I'm curious, just in terms of differentiating around professional development, is it for K-12 districts, is it as simple as just involving as many stakeholders as possible, or is there other things that districts can be doing to begin to differentiate their PD?
I think first and foremost, kind of going back to what I said earlier, like as a district, it's wise to say, like, here are the 10 apps or 10 things we support in our school district. These things, these are the ones that will provide you PD on. These are the ones that will make sure have single sign-on access. They're approved for student data privacy. They're approved for accessibility. Here's our list. And here's the way we can grow our list if we want to. And once you have kind of that set list, then you can start to build your PD from that, because that way you're not trying to provide PD for everything. You're providing PD for this set book. And then I think it's important to offer a baseline. So that way you can say, okay, everybody has the same basic knowledge on each of these tools. Now, of course, since we're differentiating though, give teachers a way to potentially opt out of let's say, EdTech Tool 101 because they've already used it. So maybe they can skip from the 101 course to the 201 course, but you still want to have a 101 and a 201 because you need to make sure you offer it to people. And I think the best way to find out where to focus those needs is to survey your stakeholders and ask, have you used this tool before? And I always kind of judge it on I couldn't teach without it. I use it often. I don't use it. What are you talking about? I've never heard of this tool before. Just because that kind of gives you a good idea of, if a teacher's using it every day and can't teach without it, then they're probably not going to be the group of teachers you need to enroll in Tool 101. And if you have a high portion of teachers that answer that, then you're going to need to have PD that's beyond just the points and clicks, but PD that really is hitting on content, pedagogy, and tech, and that intersection of all three. And, with differentiation right now, obviously you have synchronous PD where you join a Zoom session or you join a Google Meet, or you have asynchronous where you're doing it on your own, whether it be you're watching videos or you're going through a PD platform. And I think too, this is something that we want to continue beyond the pandemic. I know in districts I've worked in, there was a large emphasis on face-to-face PD, and that definitely works for some people, but a lot of people are really enjoying and actually able to do more PD when it's offered asynchronously because they can do it from their home, or they can, I used to joke about like getting PD from Twitter while in line at the grocery store, so yeah, those different things. So the different ability levels, whether it be point and click or more advanced integrated with content and pedagogy, your synchronous and your asynchronous, all built on teacher need and not perceived teacher need, but actual teacher need from a survey or a stakeholder group input or something of the like.
Yeah, I think, I've heard so often from educators just the power of like Twitter and building their PLNs and just getting professional development, like you said, just waiting in line at the grocery store. And I think, the other thing is that you said, just to comment on, is just the power of allowing people to do professional development at their own pace. And it's just like, no matter whatever industry you're in, like people don't typically like to be told what to do, when to do it, and that sort of thing. So I think just offering that sort of flexibility while also hitting the goals and getting, the professional development complete is a win-win for everybody. And so I think that leads me to kind of like the final portion and that's just from the admin's perspective. There's so many decisions that are made with technology, are made with professional development. Remote learning has changed things. What can admins learn from this period of time, and how do you think that they can use it to benefit students with technology?
Yeah, I think when we're thinking about students, I think a lot of teachers are really starting to figure out exactly what technology works for the content that they teach. So, for me as a former English teacher, obviously, word processing, presentation, listening and speaking, there's a lot of different tools out there that I can harness to do that, whether it be, slides or things like Flipgrid. But then when we start to think about things like math, what are the tools that really work for math? Or what are some of those tools that work across subjects, just there's unique ways to use them for different subjects. So I think, of Screencastify, I could have my students do an oral presentation and use Screencastify to record their screen and their slides and record themselves speaking and then send me the video. Or maybe students use Screencastify, but instead of actually screencasting their screen, they use the webcam only mode and they tilt their camera down and they narrate as they do a math problem. These different ways that teachers are able to use the tech across subjects, I think is going to be really useful, because when we go back to face-to-face learning, in theory, these tools aren't going to go away. So now how do we integrate fantastic face-to-face instruction with the benefits that these technologies provide us? Being able to have video so you can go back and re-listen to things or go back and review things, or having things documented in photos or that you can put in a digital portfolio. Like, there's so many different things that we can take and integrate it into our face-to-face practices that I think will definitely continue to benefit students. And I also think too, a lot has been learned about, is the technology we use accessible for all students? And I think that, a lot of ed tech companies are feeling that pressure and are starting to realize like, oh, wow, like maybe we haven't been meeting the needs of all students the way we should. And I think, even teachers are realizing like, wow, like, my students are having a hard time reading my slides. Like things like that, I think will also continue to benefit students as well as we come back to face-to-face. And I think one benefit that will benefit students by way of how it benefits their teachers is, teachers have been very clock bound and very school bound, site bound, just like students have been seat bound prior to the pandemic. You wake up, you go to work, you teach from blah to blah, you have your prep period, you grade, you do these things, and then you go home and then you probably keep working. But now, a principal can't just walk into your room. Maybe they can walk into your Microsoft Teams call or what have you, but they can't just walk in the way they used to. And I think what remote learning is really showing is how professional educators are. You have educators that are in their home and they have their own small children that are trying to do remote learning, and they're trying to teach a room full of 36-ish kids, and they are able to do it. It may not be flawless, but they're able to get it done. They're not on site, but they're still creating content. They're still grading. They're still giving feedback. They're still talking to parents. And I think that just speaks volumes of the professionalism of educators across the United States. And I hope that, something that admins can learn from this is maybe there's a little bit more room for remote work for educators beyond the pandemic. And maybe there's a little bit more room for remote learning for students beyond the pandemic. Because if we can do this in a time of crisis, imagine what we could do when we're not in a pandemic. And I hope that not only do admins, think about and ponder this idea, but I also think that it would be great for the community to ponder as well, because, educators in schools do such a service for communities. And I think that, they've really, like I said, not everything's been perfect and not everything's been easy, but they've really shown their ability to adapt to try and meet the needs of communities and students. And, I hope that schools and educators are, more respected when we come out of this as well, because that will definitely benefit students, whether they're using technology or not.
What an awesome response. We've been preaching adaptability on this show since it started. And I got to tell you, it's just incredible, some of the stories that have come out of this period and what's happening now, and really couldn't agree with you more. I think innovation allows for more remote work and just adaptability across the country in various districts, and just getting your job done and making sure students were still learning is happening. And I think that's super powerful. This was a ton of fun. Ari, where can people, I mentioned your Twitter handle, EdTech Ari, where can other people find you online?
EdTech Ari on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. That's pretty much, you search EdTech Ari, you will find me.
Yes, and you're very active. So everyone go find her and hit follow. She'll drop some more of these knowledge bombs if you follow her. Thank you so much for the time. This was a lot of fun, and stay safe, and we'll talk to you again real soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
And Ari was bringing the heat on that one, wasn't she? Man, that was fun. Had a lot of great insights. I love talking to people like that. You can just tell she is so passionate about her craft, and that is so awesome. And she dropped so many cool nuggets there. Hopefully you wrote those down, or maybe you'll listen to the episode again. That might not be a bad idea. Go follow her at EdTech Ari. You'll learn a ton. We are, as she's tweeting out some knowledge bombs every day. Thank you so much. Definitely hit that subscribe button. Leave that review if you wouldn't be so kind. Take care of yourself. Take care of others around you. Best of luck during back to school. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon.